All right, so hopefully some more people will start to trickle in as we move on with the morning. I know it's early, but I think we have a pretty good group. So I will just start by saying that this, this is the third and final, as I'm sure you're all aware, community resilience building workshop out of the 3 that we had scheduled. Today's topic is social and cultural resilience in Chester. I'm sure you all saw the agenda that I sent out in the invitation yesterday, but the day will look much the same as it has the last 2 times, where we're going to start with a very brief slideshow. This one's going to have a little bit more new content in it because we'll be discussing some specific societal resilience topics, which I find that infrastructure and environment features and resilience, even though there's a clear line between them, those 2 conversations really resemble each other a little bit more than the social and cultural conversation does, because it's so abstract. Whereas when we're talking about infrastructure, we're generally talking about concrete and pinpointable assets, and the same with the environment. So we'll sort of go through what that looks like and just things to keep on the top of your mind as we progress with the conversation. As usual, Patty will be keeping her eye on the chat. So if you have any questions or comments that you don't want to speak up for, but just want to put out there, you can feel free to write those in there, and Patty will bring them into the conversation or just take note. If you have any tech issues that Patty might be able to help with, in terms of like, how do I do something on Zoom, or I missed something that somebody said, Patty will see those. I will be sharing my screen, so I won't be able to see the chat. And I think that that's it for the introduction. And as far as I'm aware, we have everyone who's here now was at at least one previous meeting. So, oh, we have another joiner.
It looks like Mario Andretti has joined us from the road.
Rich Holzman here. I am with my best friend Hans, and he's going to listen in too, because he's got plenty to offer.
Oh, great.
Good morning, Hans.
Hi, Rich and Hans. So, so with that, I will get started on the presentation. Let's see.
Oh, I'm good.
This always takes a second. Okay. All right. So, oops, I forgot how to do this. There we go. All right, can everybody see that full screen?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so again, welcome to our 3rd Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness for the Chester MVP workshops. At this point, you're all familiar with our faces, but Patty and I will be representing PVPC today and facilitating the workshop. And again, we look to Meredith for a lot of the in-depth conversation she's already had with you all, and all of the background research and everything she's contributed to this project. So she is our community facilitator here today. My slides have stopped. Oh, there we go. All right. So we've done this before, so I won't talk much about this today, but if you have any questions, feel free to unmute and just ask them right off the bat. This presentation will simultaneously be a conversation, or as I said before, if you prefer to write it in the chat, feel free to do so. And if you would like to raise your hand, both Patty and I should be able to see that. If you don't know how to raise your hand or prefer not to, again, just feel free to unmute and speak out loud. Today's workshop agenda, again, will be a brief presentation, I think a little bit longer than yesterday, the one earlier this week on Tuesday, but not too long. And then we're going to spend most of our time in discussion around how to bolster Chester's social resilience. There will be a couple of slides that we have already gone through. This will be the 3rd time, but I think they're good to keep on the top of your head. So what I'll just say briefly here is that we are in the process of developing the final strategies that the town of Chester is prioritizing to achieve resilience, with the future and present of climate change. The goal here is to be able to become MVP planning certified, which will happen at the end of this fiscal year for you all. This is part of the process. And then once you're certified, you'll be able to apply for those MVP action grants, which are at this point available for up to $2 million per municipality per project on a competitive basis. So there's the potential there for a good amount of funding to help with real direct projects. Once again, getting this into your psyches here, eligible project types include 3 different types. Those are planning, including assessments, capacity building, and regulatory updates. So the more sort of intangible projects that get you ready for changing business as usual to change to a more resilient model of doing business within the town, and also helping to ensure that any upcoming construction projects or more concrete projects have a solid basis in planning around their resilience. They will also, the MVP action grants will also fund design and permitting of construction projects. And then they will fund the construction projects themselves, or at least a portion there, or on the, if it's not construction per se, on the ground implementation. There's also a whole suite of projects that are not MVP competitive for action grants. And as you've heard me say before, those are ones that generally do not rely on nature-based solutions for, with, the narrative in the grant application does not specify how nature-based solutions will be utilized. And also those types of projects for which there are already established consistent funding sources, generally already provided by the state. So if there's already a dedicated funding source, MVP can work with that, but they won't replace that. So for example, if you wanted to cut down a lot of trees, you should apply to DCR forestry grants instead of MVP. If you wanted to replace a culvert, MVP might help funding that if there's a resilience study along with that, or if you're really committed to figuring out nature-based solutions alongside that. But there's also dedicated funding already to replacing small bridges, culverts, etc. We won't be looking at this during the course of our time together live, but as you've seen before, the static slide, there is an MVP climate grant viewer where you can see every community that has applied for a planning grant and or an action grant, ongoing or previous, and you can see short descriptions of what those are, if they're already been implemented or if they're in process. So that could be helpful in writing the future MVP action grants for you all if you're interested in seeing precedent, or just knowing what communities are also planning certified if you were considering doing a regional application, which is also a possibility.
There's another element to that, if I can interject, is that some of the towns are grappling with some of the same issues that other small towns are. And it's a really good opportunity to ask them to share their findings, so that it doesn't have to be duplicated over many small towns, like the dirt road study that's being done. And I'll make that information available.
Yeah, that's a good point, Meredith. So the resource I posted in the chat is to, it's not the interactive map viewer here.
Oh, Patty, I think you're muted. There you go.
Okay. Did you hear anything I said, or?
We heard what you said up to the link that you posted in the chat is not this grant viewer, and then you
Okay. So you could look through that document and figure out sort of what things might be of interest, and then even contact that community. I've often asked communities if they can share their grant request with me. So then you have a good place to work from. So that's a good point, Meredith.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the dirt road study is, I was also going to bring that up. I think it's a perfect example. Last year we worked with, four of your very close or neighboring communities in a regional MVP action grant planning grant application that they called the four Four Hill Towns or something like that was the name of the collaborative. And that was a very popular recommendation that was also included in that MVP planning grant, was to study how to make dirt roads more climate resilient, because there was simultaneously a drive to not pave those roads due to lack of town resources, like budget resources, et cetera, but also because a lot of the people who lived on those roads or nearby those roads really appreciated the rural aesthetic and sort of the rural tradition of the dirt roads. And at the same time recognized that, as Patty mentioned, I think in our last meeting on the environment, that a lot of times the dirt roads can have sedimentation and siltation effects on local water sources. And obviously we all know about the repeated mud seasons that we've been having with freezes and thaws. So it was very interesting to us to see that out of the Berkshire County that this study was also suggested, and then they were awarded for it. So I think that that's one that many of our communities in the Pioneer Valley can simultaneously learn from. And it's just a good example of one that's happening now that you will be able to look to probably next year to see the results.
So Corinne, Meredith is raising an important point in the chat that we don't have in our slides. And it is that these grants require a 25% match.
Mm-hmm.
So the MVP program has lists of other grants. And so it's important to think of how you might combine things. And since this is state funding, you can look for federal match or local match where it's available.
Right.
And it can be in kind.
Right. Yeah, that's
So,
what I was going to
yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Which, you know, if you're going for a large amount of funding, it's still hard for volunteer communities, you know, largely volunteer communities to meet that total 25% match with just in kind, but it's a great way to start stacking match sources. Okay, so this slide we saw in the very first presentation. It was not in our last presentation. So, but because we're at the end here, I just wanted to remind everyone where we are on this project's timeline. So the MVP planning process for Chester really began in the late fall of 2020. And clearly we are in the March to April bubble here, where we're conducting the last of our community resilience building workshops. Prior to that, Meredith and Emily and I had been doing a lot of, Meredith had been doing a lot of community outreach, Emily, you know, doing like sides straddling both, and I have been doing a lot of literature review, reviewing Chester's existing plans, looking at regional plans, documents that have been written up, et cetera, to understand on the ground conditions. And that has fed into these community resilience building workshops. And then moving forward into next month, we will be rounding up our draft summary of findings. So that's the final report. That's pretty short. It's not a planning document, and well, it's not a plan, so to speak, but it's a planning document. It's a report that will be the culmination of all of that research and the input from the community resilience building workshops. We will also be conducting the public community engagement, and we're still in talks with what that looks like, but there's a lot of ideas right now. And the feedback that we get from the general public will be incorporated into that summary of findings. And it's ultimately the summary of findings, once the town signs off on it, you know, this looks good to us, that we send to EEA for their approval to have Chester become a MVP certified community. It makes sense after these community resilience building workshops are wrapped up and you're able to look at the full matrix and we get the input from the public, to start thinking about if you want to apply for an MVP action grant sooner rather than later. We will not be able to, the current round of MVP action grants that's open, you will not be able to apply for because the timing isn't right. So it'll probably be in a little less than a year that another round opens up. So we can help you start to think about which of these action grants might you want to apply for. And certainly not every community applies for one within that first year. They might need some more time to recoup, but it's as these action grants get more and more competitive, as more communities become certified, it's certainly worth thinking about getting in sooner rather than later.
Corinne?
Mhm.
Could I just quickly ask, what's the size of the competitive playing field that we're going to be on? Is it statewide or Western Mass-wide, or both?
It's statewide, and I don't know, Patty, if you have a little bit more insight into this right now than I do, but my understanding is that there are regional MVP coordinators that work for EEA, and they are there to help the communities within their region, which we talked about at the first presentation, but it doesn't totally correspond with the counties. It more corresponds to like watershed and sort of geographical area. But they help their communities to a certain extent develop the best competitive grants that they can, but then they're all entered into the same statewide pool, and they're all sort of considered against each other. So I think in the first presentation, there was the slide, which I didn't include in this one, but I believe that last MVP Action Grant round, there were 41 awards, which I don't know off the top of my head how many applications
There were 140. It's very competitive.
Yeah.
And so we've been advocating, there's a group of advocates, and we met last week with the environmental secretary to just advocate for more funds. I don't know that that's going to happen quickly, but there's a clear need. If you have 140 communities applying from across the state and they can really only fund 41. But I think the process they have set up where you submit a letter of interest and then your regional coordinator works with you to say, this is a great idea, or no, this is not going to be competitive this round, is a really good screening process. So I think that's helpful. So you don't put a lot of time and effort into something that's not going to fly well and be super competitive.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would also add to what Patty said, and Patty did bring this up. I don't remember if it was the second workshop or the first workshop, but that PVPC was very lucky with our last round, and that the majority, if not all, of the MVP action grants that we worked with our communities on developing were awarded. And I think that a big portion of that is that we have really helped our communities consider the educational and outreach component, like the social side of every MVP action grant, even if the grant itself is to do something like, I don't know, do a regulatory review. We had a few of those this year. And so you can see how that could be very behind the scenes, sort of like non-glamorous, but how do you develop a public education and outreach campaign around that that's engaging? It's engaging, but it's also, I'm blanking on the word that I want right now, but what I'm thinking of is like honest, where you're soliciting feedback from the public and then you have an actual plan on how to implement that feedback. It's not just sort of checking off a box. And so we're here to definitely use us as a resource to help you think through those. How do we make this innovative and scalable, which is something that they're looking at, so it can be replicated in other communities like yours, and other communities can learn lessons from it. But also, how do we make it truly engaging with the public it's designed to serve? And those are ultimately what really help make a grant very competitive, I think, in this program. So today we are looking at social vulnerability. And as Emily pointed out in the first workshop, this graphic here was developed in California. So there's some things that we will not have to worry about in Chester, but it's more here to be illustrative of how there can start to be a sort of ripple effect or cascading effects of different direct climate effects, and how those climate effects can affect some populations more than others. So it's a great platform to starting to think about social vulnerability in Chester. So for example, we've already talked about extreme heat. We know that extreme heat not only affects the environment, which we talked about earlier this week, it of course affects people as well, but it doesn't affect everybody equally. Those that already have, heart disease, or that might have asthma or COPD might be more at risk from items such as extreme heat. Extreme heat also has an effect on air pollution. It amplifies bad air quality. So there starts to be a cascading effect there where, maybe someone who's in their mid-20s and doesn't have any comorbidities, might feel really hot and faint, but they can sort of go inside and maybe just relax for the rest of the day. But somebody else that is maybe a senior or like a very small
very
child
good.
might fare worse with extreme heat, and especially so if they have asthma or heart disease. Severe weather, I'm not going to go through all of these, but just as another example, severe weather, severe weather has the ability to, if there's strong winds or like an ice storm or something like that, a tree can fall, a limb can fall on anybody's roof, but there's going to be some people who have a harder time dealing with the effects of that for financial reasons, perhaps. Or maybe because they already had, other health conditions, and the added stress aggravates those health conditions. So thinking about intersectionality there, where it comes to the different existing health effects, age, financial stability, and how race and gender can fit into all of those, will help you craft very strong strategies to deal with these climate hazards. So just to review here, so that we know how the climate effects for Massachusetts and for the Westfield Basin specifically might affect Chester's population. Changes in precipitation, there are projected to be, by the end of the century, so by 2100, an 18% increase in consecutive dry days. So that means increasing drought, while at the same time, interspersed with those dry days, there's going to be a 57% increase in days with greater than 1 inch rainfall. So more frequent, greater magnitude rainstorms. And there's also going to be an increase of about 7 inches of additional annual rainfall. So what this really means is that we're going to have more drought during certain periods, and then there's going to be other periods where it's going to be much more water altogether. So I'm starting to think of like a dry season and a rainy season, almost the way that they have in the tropics. Although of course that's not how anyone's describing it, but we're going to have both dry weather and rainy weather. We're going to have a rise in temperatures. There's predicted to be almost an 11% increase in average annual temperature over the course of the year, or like annually, with a 42% decrease in days per year with the minimum temperatures of less than 32. So it's going to be freezing less often. There's going to be that striking number of over 1,000% increase in 90-degree days per year. So freezing less often, over 90 degrees more often, and overall warmer average temperature of around 11 degrees Fahrenheit. And then there's also just going to be an increase in frequency and magnitude of extreme weather generally. So that's the rainstorms, the windstorms, extreme heat, et cetera, all of the extreme weather we're going to have more of. Diving into temperatures specifically, this is a big one for social vulnerability. As we just described, it's going up. The cold temperatures are rising, the hot temperatures are rising, and the average temperatures are rising. Summer and fall are going to experience greater rises generally than spring and winter. With summer highs maybe being 9% higher by 2050 and 17% higher by 2100. And fall highs are experiencing greater raises than summer highs. So it basically means an extension of the summer weather for us. The impacts of this mean that in winter, we're going to have more rain versus snow, and more snow melt even when it falls. So it'll sort of fall, then melt, then maybe more snowfall and more melt, or maybe it'll snow and then it will rain and that will melt the snow. So there's going to be more flooding in winter and more freezing ice in winter due to all of the melt and combined rainfall. Of course, the drought, the increased rain, the increased drought, and the increased temperatures will have an effect on agriculture. And we've already sort of hinted at the effect that this might have on road maintenance with dirt roads, more mud season, more fluctuations in temperatures leading to freeze and thaw for dirt roads, but also, of course, for your paved roads, that means more potholes and more general maintenance needed throughout the year rather than just seasonally. Patty, were you going to say something?
Yeah, again, I'm having trouble with my mute and unmute, so my apologies. I also wanted to note, while, you know, these are really serious impacts for Chester, they're also sometimes far more serious for other locations in the country. And so one of the things, you know, we're keeping our eye on now is sort of what are the implications of this and movement of people to our region. Holyoke did a study with Hurricane Maria through MVP on climate migration. And so it is a thing. And I think Meredith has talked a little bit about sort of how things are changing in terms of home building and house purchases. But I know, Andy, you probably have an eye on this as well. And I'd love to see some baseline analysis now so that we can capture it as it happens more. And so not only is it the climate impacts, but I would say also pandemic, getting people to seek more rural, less crowded locations in which to live.
And just to add to that, Patty, definitely our last MVP planning workshop that we were engaged in was before the pandemic. So the COVID pandemic has added to, it's probably sped up and created an urgency as we know, the housing market has just really shot up generally during this time, and people are moving from cities to more suburban or rural areas. But at PVPC, we've been saying that this is just something that it's happening faster right now, but it's something that, you know, is generally what we're thinking for climate migration will be happening. And it's something that we haven't experienced too much urgency from our communities, I would say, largely in exploring. So it will be interesting to me. I know that there was some talk about this in the chat last time. It will be interesting to me to see what Chester ends up thinking about this, if it ends up being a priority or not. We're not telling you one way or the other, you know, if it should be. But it is something that has the potential to truly change a community's built environment and also social makeup, you know, for better and worse. I don't mean to imply it's a bad thing, but it's definitely something that can be prepared for. And so that's something to think about when we're working on strategies here. And I'll also just say, just to round that off, because Patty, you brought up Holyoke, that, you know, in this sense, climate migration could be like somebody who lives in Holyoke, like myself, buying a summer home in Chester just to escape the heat, you know, or it could be somebody who is moving full time to Chester to escape the heat or to be away from whatever climate effects are happening where they currently live. If they live in the South or something like that, and they're trying to move somewhere north where it's cooler, etc. So moving into the social impacts of the climate effects we were just talking about, extreme temperatures. We know in terms of like who are the vulnerable populations for extreme temperatures, we know that seniors are particularly prone to experiencing heat stroke and exhaustion, and seniors are also more likely to experience hypothermia. Young children and so it's sort of the two extremes, so to speak. So like the younger you are and then the older you are, the less able you are to regulate your own body temperature. And so just the hospitals around here see more of young children and then seniors with these types of complaints. And the UMass Donahue Institute does age projections where they take current census data and then they sort of build out, okay, well, in the next decade, the next 50 years, I don't know if it goes up to 100 years, but what do we expect population demographics to look like in terms of age? So the UMass Donahue Institute projects that by 2040, over 38% of Chester will be aged 60 and older. So that's over a third of Chester, and that's not quite I think usually when we talk about seniors, we talk about 65 and older, but over a third will be 60 or older by 2040. In Chester's hazard mitigation plan, the author of that plan said that Chester was expecting that by 2050, 60% of Chester will be 65 and older. So there's a big discrepancy there. I don't know why the hazard mitigation plan has such a large number. It might be more, UMass Donahue Institute is certainly more conservative by saying that over about a third, just over a third will be 60 or over by 2040, but it's something to consider. Either way, it's a large portion of the population. And that's true in most of our communities, by the way. Many of our Pioneer Valley communities, but also the hill towns. Extreme temperature beyond age, extreme temperature also has the effect, or has the ability to affect households differently, depending on how they're outfitted or the socioeconomic condition of the homeowners. So in Chester, we know households are less likely to have AC. That's true in the hill towns generally because no one needed it previously. Or it was very rare, you know, and it was not on consecutive days that temperatures were so high that AC was necessary. So that's going to be changing, although it's probably still true that many don't have AC. Financial constraints affect how often households can run heat or air conditioning. So if you're a senior on fixed income, for example, that might be true. Or if you are either jobless or you're in a low paying job, those might also be true as well. And financial and physical constraints affect the ability to respond quickly to a household emergency. So if you have limited mobility for whatever reason, or again, you are on a fixed income or you don't have much financial resources, the ability to like quickly call a plumber to fix a burst pipe or you know, something to that effect might be much more difficult for you. So here we are again, looking at some of the nexus between the environmental factors and the social factors. So fluctuating temperatures can limit mobility and ability to conduct routine business. As you all have experienced, that is true, for example, with mud season, the dirt roads with potholes. If there's any sort of extreme freeze where a road becomes too icy to traverse or something, for example, can impact evacuation routes. The routine maintenance that used to just be twice a year, something to that effect, is now becoming more regular, and that can strain the town budget. And it can also lead to an increase in groundwater contamination, whether that's due to increased salting or salting for freezing on roads. And also, I would say surface water contamination as well from, you know, runoff. So then looking at drought, we know that Chester relies on groundwater wells for about 50% of its population and then surface water reservoirs for the other 50%. So drought has a clear direct connection to the local availability of drinking water. Drought can affect food availability and price for regionally grown foods. And it can also impact the ability to grow your own produce, which I'm imagining that many people in Chester at least have some vegetable garden where they, you know, whether it's a hobby or not, whether it's a hobby or it's something that they rely upon to supplement much of their grocery bought food. So that can have a real impact depending on, you know, how much you rely on your vegetable garden. This is a screenshot taken from Pioneer Valley Planning Commission's map that we have hosted on our website. And I believe Patty put the link in the chat that if you want to take a look more closely, it's a dynamic map. This is just a screenshot, but you can sort of play around with it to learn different things or overlay different information. Here we are, I'm sure you can see this is Chester right here. And we're looking at proximity to local food and then barriers or healthy healthy food proximity. I think local food often has the definition of like grown locally. That's not what we mean here. It's just like how close are you to be able to get food. And then also looking at the household challenges in order to access food. So this is on a color spectrum, and with red being the lowest healthy food proximity. So how close you are to a full service grocery store is how this was made. And green being the other end of that spectrum. You can see there's not any green, other than the pinpoints here, which are stores. There's no green on this map at all in this part of Hampden County. And then blue and, I'm sorry, red is low healthy food proximity, and yellow, oh no, I said that right, red and green, I'm sorry. And then blue is low challenges. So that means a household challenges are, does a house have an access to at least one vehicle to be able to drive to a grocery store? Are they considered to be poverty level or low median income? Or are they considered to be high income? And other sort of like individual household factors such as that. Do they have the money to buy food? Do they receive food stamps or SNAP benefits? Do they have the ability to drive to a grocery store or take public transit? And then blue is low challenges and yellow is high challenges. So I'll just tell you, it's hard for you to know because you haven't been able to turn off and on the layers here, but what we have here is blue overlaid with red in Chester. And the reason that the red cuts off is because those radiate out from the road. So it just means that there's no road over here. But the red means that overall Chester, relative to the rest of this part of Massachusetts, has low healthy food proximity. You're not close to very many full service grocery stores, if any. And the blue means that the households generally experience low challenges to getting food though. So it means that generally, it's not true for everybody, but generally households in Chester have the cars to be able to drive to those far away grocery stores, and they have the money to be able to purchase food once they do it. So low proximity, but also low barriers to be able to get food. Where this could change is if the roads are shut down, or if there's a change in global food supply, or national food supply chain, and all of a sudden those grocery stores don't have enough food, then there would be a question there as to where Chester would get food. So that was our sort of summary of thinking about social vulnerability with climate change effects that we know are happening in the Westfield Basin and in Massachusetts generally. We're moving back into the matrix. So as a reminder, the same 4 climate hazards are listed up top here. There are some pre-populated features and assets that were generated out of those open space and recreation plan, hazard mitigation plan, and all of the outreach work that Meredith has done with you. We'll have the opportunity to add to those or to amend them if we see necessary. And then we will be developing strategies to either reduce the vulnerability to those assets or increase their resilience as related to each of these hazards, which is why there are the 4 columns, but often the strategies span the columns, which is why I will write them, I'll merge the cells or something like that, if you've ever wondered. So these are just some of the examples of how we've pre-populated the matrix. Societal feature examples include emergency services and volunteers, communications, how does the town communicate with its public? Is there a reverse 911 alert system, et cetera? Historic buildings are an asset and sometimes a vulnerability as well. They add to the cultural sort of identity of the town, and they might also serve some important emergency features as well. Others could be people who have any of those, one or more of those specific vulnerabilities we spoke about before. So that could be low income, non-English speakers, immigrants, people of color, youth, seniors, etc. Regional services. Those are both strengths and vulnerabilities in that the communities have joined together to share budgets. It might also mean that you need to work. You might identify some vulnerabilities with those, or some particular strengths that you'll have to work with the regional community to develop. Businesses in the local economy, with that also tax rates, vector-borne diseases. We brought those up with environment, but again, they play a very important social feature as well. Flood maps, plans, and regulations. And then a pride and a sense of place, the reason that you're all in Chester and are here, you know, dedicating your Saturday morning to discussing how to make Chester more resilient. I'm not going to spend as much time on this slide this time, but again, we want to really figure out if there's a way to adapt any of these strategies that come up with to be nature-based, that will make them more competitive, more in the spirit of MVP. It can be difficult to think of how to do that with a lot of the social strategies. But a lot of times the social strategies combine very well with strategies you've previously identified for infrastructure or environment that can be more nature-based, and then you can create sort of a holistic picture there. These are some examples that we know MVP has been interested in the past for adaptation strategies for community resilience. These, the images here are just screenshots. They don't necessarily relate to the bullet points. So developing flood resilient building design guidelines and a flood resiliency zoning overlay to adapt to flood risk projections for the year 2070. So many communities in Massachusetts, you know, are dealing with flood issues, Chester included. It's something to consider. Creating resources to help renters, small homeowners, small businesses, and large organizations prepare for flooding, heat, and extreme weather. Perform an analysis of heat islands and tree canopy. Not all of these are going to be directly relevant to a rural town like Chester, and not all of them will be, you know, some of them will be more rural focused and, you know, more easily scaled to Chester, but they're meant to jog your imagination here. Develop outreach and educational materials to communicate climate change vulnerabilities and the benefits of ongoing resilient investments. And develop a mobile market for at-risk residents. That's sort of directly related to that food map we looked at. We know that we're not close to very many food stores. So a mobile market could help in that sense. Reducing, another important thing that we have seen MVP very interested in, and also we just know is true as planning professionals, is that reducing barriers to participation is very important. And the way that we have seen that play out in a lot of these grants is providing childcare so that parents are more easily able to attend public meetings, charrettes, etc. Providing transportation, food, translation, multi-pronged media, etc. Working with local volunteers to get the word out who are already connected to the community. Working with local businesses who may have their own interest in participating, but can also reach out to their customers as well. And hosting community events at local warming and cooling shelters to raise awareness. So Meredith had said something like this, I think at our last 2 workshops, where she had mentioned, you know, how great it would be to have community events where we show everybody what the evacuation routes are, or where we show everybody where the local shelters are. So that way you're helping build resilience before that is actually needed, you know, before the time of the emergency. So that's the last slide here. Before we go into the matrix, does anybody have any questions about social resilience?
Ren, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I just want to acknowledge the sort of experience has been really glitchy in the chat. And also with the microphone. So if people are having trouble, I'm sorry. But hopefully you can mute and unmute yourself, you know, without as much trouble as I'm having. But Meredith also got kicked off. I don't know if anyone else has gotten kicked off. Yeah.
Okay. All right, it looks like Meredith is back on now, hopefully. All right. So I'm going to stop my share for a second. So Patty, are you able to see the chat, or has it just been that you can't respond?
Well, now it's much better without a screen share.
Oh,
But have been trying to respond to chat and can't.
okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything from the chat that I can pull it up to? I don't see anything in it.
So Meredith is noting that Chester Elementary School student population of 119 students has grown by 7% over 5 school years.
Okay, sounds like we should put that in the features. So I'm going to, was there anything else?
Nope.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again. And this time go to the matrix. Okay, so I think what worked well for us last time is going over the features so everybody has a sense of what's already in there. We can see if we want to add anything else or amend anything. And then once we have all agreed on the features, then we can sort of move into the strategies. And I believe last time we just sort of, we didn't go down one by one. We sort of just had an open conversation and addressed as things came up, and that seems to work well. So we can be sure to do that. And it looks like we're going to have just over an hour if our goal is to get out of here by 11. So I think we are in very good shape. So, okay, starting with the, well, I'll just write in what Meredith said so that we don't forget. And then I'll go through.
And that information was gathered through the online, the internet, not from an individual. I have not had a good success getting response from the elementary school. That was some of the information I was hoping to gain from them.
Okay.
But that's what I was able to get. So if anyone has other data, please share.
Yeah, just I can give you a couple of points on that. One of the reasons for the increase is that Gateway went to an all-day preschool program, which significantly increased the numbers at that level. So I'm sure that 7% is including that preschool addition that came about 2 years ago.
Can I ask, Andy, I'm wondering if you are, the other sort of data point I've been wondering about is whether people who've typically had second homes in the in Chester and surrounding communities are now moving into those homes and making them permanent homes. The idea being that they didn't use services before to the degree that they would, but now there's more reliance on town services from folks who are deciding to live there permanently. Are you seeing any of that?
There are a few. I mean, Chester certainly doesn't compare with towns like Otis and Beckett that have a significant number of second homes. Our percentage is much lower.
Okay.
But I'm not sure that it has impacted to a great degree the services for the town. Most of the second homes are those homes that have their own wells and are up in the hills and so forth. So I'm not sure. And of course, they don't, second homes don't have children that go to the schools, which is the biggest part of our budget. So I'm not sure what services you might think are being impacted.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was talking to Jean Leclerc the other day, and she suggested that's something to keep an eye on, that people sort of have come here from urban locations during the pandemic and are realizing life is pretty good here and you can also work from here. And whether they have children or not, I don't know. But yeah, so I don't know specifically services, but that could be a factor.
And we see that as a positive impact because they are frequenting the businesses and restaurants in the area.
Yeah.
So we would prefer to have more of that rather than less of that.
Okay.
I do think earlier in the discussion, you talked a little bit about the impact of migration that's going to come about in the next 10 to 20 to 30 years. And I do think that an analysis of that and pre-planning would be a good thing. That might be one of the projects we think about. It could be a multi-community project because it's going to happen to a lot of the hill towns. So smart growth planning, that type of thing, zoning laws, those studies, I would advocate for.
So Andy, that's a really great strategy. I'm going to ask you to, I mean, I wrote down in my notebook that you said it. We're going to remember it, but
Okay.
we should find, let's go over the features first, and then we'll sort of figure out which feature that applies most to. Maybe, I don't know if there's anything in here yet, or if we want to add something.
Could
So
I just back on what Andy was saying for a minute?
sure.
Would it be appropriate at this moment? Because I'll wait if you want me to.
Well, I don't want to lose the thread of what Andy was saying, so I would say yes, but we should also go through the strategies. Yes, let's do this, and then let's go through the strategies. So go ahead.
Okay, I'll just be brief. I think I agree with everything that Andy's saying. People know my mantra about inland and upland, and I believe that migration is going to be will intensify, and there's always a positive aspect and a negative aspect. To connect with the school situation, I think one of the things we need to be aware of is that there's a very significant decline in enrollment at the secondary level, which is going to require at the high school level. And we're going to have to look at options, alternatives for delivering high school education to the kids, number one, that's of high quality and also affordable. And that's an issue that really needs to be in the forefront, in my view, because that makes us vulnerable economically, and all these interrelated factors are part of this. And if it continues to result in costly education for the high school students, that is going to be a struggle in terms of maintaining quality, is a vulnerability issue that has to be dealt with.
Great. Okay, so I added a couple of things to the features list based off of that, which is significant decline in enrollment at the high school. Obviously, that's a separate, both related to the schools, but they're two separate items there. I also added potential for climate migration as its own feature, and we can, as we go through here, we can decide if that needs to be its own feature or not, but I didn't see anything that was directly saying that already. So
Yeah, and I think what Richard's getting at too is, and I've heard this in doing master planning in Blandford, is that families stay in the area through middle school, but in high school, there's a movement out of those families because of the, sort of looking for better educational opportunities and more robust programming for high school students.
And I think that's available. We just have to be creative and really explore that in both expansively and in depth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then let's go through these list of features here, and we can see if there's anything else we want to add. Or I did notice that there's a lot in here that's sort of grouped into one. There's like many ideas that are grouped into individual features. So it might also be that you decide to say, you know what, let's separate those because we want to have strategies for individual aspects of them. So definitely feel free to do that as well. So our first one here is the communications, that's alerts and technology. I see code red is with a question mark. So that would be a question for you all, is if that's your sort of like alert system that you have with residents or not. I don't know if anybody knows that off the top of their head.
I do. We do have code red that everybody can subscribe to, and they subscribe through the website to use.
Okay. And so without getting into strategies necessarily, would you consider this communications, the code red itself, and then also including the website, Board of Health style communications, et cetera? Do you think those are going well, or they're not going well right now? Is it a vulnerability or a strength, do you think, or both?
I personally think it's doing well. We're working on updating it currently, the webmaster and myself.
Okay.
So I think it's going well, but I'm also not a resident of the town. So maybe someone here who is can chime in and let me know what their thoughts are. Are they not happy? That kind of thing.
As a resident, I think it is going well. communication goes out when emergencies happen on the phone lines, which is good. It's a good alert. So I think it's good.
Great.
I'll second that. It's a strong working system.
Okay,
That too.
great. Okay, so I'll leave it as a strength for now. Which, by the way, even if something is listed as this column is almost, it's just to help you think, but it's not committing you to anything. Even if you list something as a strength, but you also have ideas on how to improve it, those can be strategies as well. Okay, so then the next one here is climate vulnerable residents with barriers to building resilience, such as income, non-English speakers, immigrants, people of color, youth, seniors, etc. This is one of the ones that there's a lot grouped in here, which there's a reason that they're all grouped together, but it might be in strategies you decide to separate some, I'm not sure. Any comments there?
I think it would almost be limited to seniors in our area.
Meredith, is this one,
What was the question again?
we were just reading the societal feature, which reads as climate vulnerable residents with barriers to building resilience, and then in parentheses, income, non-English speakers, immigrants, people of color, youth, and seniors.
I think that may have been culled from the hazard mitigation plan, but I'm not sure.
This was not from the hazard mitigation plan. What I was going to ask you, Meredith, is if this came up in your conversations, or it could just be that Emily pre-populated this and used all of these as examples, but being familiar with Chester's demographics, I would agree with what I think Andy said, which is that it's in Chester, the only sizable population might be income and seniors and youth out of these.
Yeah,
So
I believe that's true, although some of that is an interesting conversation in the same way that when I do a volunteer day and I don't have those communities represented, it's also a good question to say why, and are there ways to make a community more inviting or enticing to populations that will make it more diverse, which is another way of having resiliency.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that would be a different feature. This is climate vulnerable residents, but then so maybe we say, like, you could decide on how to phrase this, but maybe another feature that we can add is sort of like lack of racial diversity or something like that, or, you know, like desire for increased racial diversity or something like that, which would have different types of strategies associated with it.
Yep.
Okay, so is everybody okay? Just because I want this to be representative of Chester, and I'm not trying to marginalize anyone here, but because I want it to be representative of Chester and for you all to feel like this is accurate for your community. Does anybody have any objections to my deleting non-English speakers, immigrants, and people of color from this particular feature?
No problem.
I do. I actually do, because I do believe we have a lot of communities that are surrounding Chester that include the African American, Black communities, Indian communities, Spanish speaking communities, and they do travel here. They come and visit our waterways a lot. So, I mean, it's still really good to include some type of signage and whatnot that is, you know, for all the surrounding areas that do come in, at least just to acknowledge that type of population that is coming in. Maybe not living here, but at least around it.
So maybe, so Corinne, could you move it to its own independent societal thing to address or expand on instead of removing it and not having it present?
Yes, I guess I didn't say that. That's
move it to another line item, because I like that idea of considering that in some of the outreach and availability.
Yes, and that is what I had meant when I suggested to you, Meredith, that we can add a new feature here. So I didn't put those two sentences together. So thank you, Laura and Meredith. We're not trying to keep anyone out here, but also you like when you submit this.
Trying to figure it out.
Well, when you submit this, my point is, I guess, I'm cutting and pasting here, not just deleting, but my point is when you submit this to EEA and you say climate vulnerable residents, and then you say immigrants or something like that on there, like refugees, but then you don't have any strategies that are addressing refugees living in Chester, for example, then it looks like you're acknowledging that they're there, but you're not doing anything for them. But if there's like literally one household or something like that, you know, is it worth creating? Then in some ways you're singling also that household out for no reason. So when it's phrased as climate vulnerable residents with barriers to building resilience, I think it's important to think about the types of strategies you want to be developing for that. And then we can create other features that also talk about diversity, but maybe in a with different strategies associated. So this is income, youth, and seniors. And then at the bottom here, should we combine what Meredith was talking about and what Laura are talking about as a sort of, Laura, I believe you were talking about, you know, making sure that visitors to Chester have resources and also like feel seen and welcome in terms of like signage and things like that. So they have resources for resilience, resources for recreation, and also language appropriate signage. And then Meredith, you just moved, I don't know if you were kicked off. Meredith, I think you were talking about looking for ways to make sure that Chester is seen that there are no barriers to like a diverse group of people either choosing to move to Chester and or choosing to visit Chester. So do you think those are the same feature, or do you think that they're separate?
I think they're part of the same. How do we all fall in love with the place? We go somewhere, we feel welcome, we feel that it has things that we would like to explore, and there's an avenue that speaks to us and allows us to feel like we're heard and communicated with. So I think that it can stand as, it's just something for all of the Hilltown communities, I think, to consider and to think of ways that they can make themselves a comfortable, attractive place to visit for populations that are more diverse.
This is Rich. I very much agree with everything that Meredith is saying. And I think that it's real benefit not only to newcomers, but to people that are here, because it opens a world to them, a world of possibilities, a way of seeing the world and seeing other human beings. I think it's an ideal that we should pursue on a continuing basis, on a sustained basis for sustainability.
I see Laura has made a heart reaction to that. I was going to say, I think this is really great conversation. How do we succinctly make this a feature that we can address with strategies? What's the phrasing here? Maybe opportunity for? I'm just going to start drafting something, and please feel free to correct me. This is your feature here.
When I was working at Tri-Town Health Department over the past 6 months too, I always had to integrate different languages in my posts, and going out and making sure that I learn about their way of life and their culture, their background. So understanding kind of like that. I know Lee also has like a founders weekend, but it also comes with a lot of Latina founders that came in, and they do like a festival, which is really, really nice and awesome food, I might add. So having a lot of like encouraging that with them maybe making their own food or hosting maybe some type of event around like some type of water, hiking and whatnot. We can get an interpreter to come in.
Okay, so what I'm drafting right now is, Laura, this is really great, and you're getting into strategies, so I'm trying to remember what you say, and also if you could, make sure that that's covered later when we're doing strategies. For the feature, I'm writing opportunity for greater cultural inclusion via outreach programming, recreational activities, etc. I wrote cultural inclusion. I don't know if that's specific enough, or if anybody feels it's too general. And I'm also wondering if
No, Rich here.
Yeah.
I think that's fine as far as you go, but I would definitely put in something. I haven't figured out how to say it yet, but that we welcome people of all backgrounds who seek to contribute to polishing and perfecting the gem of the valley of Chester. You know, that just as historically people came from all places to contribute to making it the hub of the hill town. So again, this can happen. This can happen because we're at a very challenging phase in our history, and it presents great possibilities, particularly with the 250th anniversary coming up in about 10 years or so.
Wow.
To welcome new people, which is what we need. We need more population. We do, but we need it in a way where people really want to embed themselves in the community and contribute as newcomers to our community, whether they're visitors or residents.
Corinne, one next step strategy that we might consider would be involving a Gateway in some sort of possibly called the student exchange program to bring in cultures of color, if you will.
Okay, yeah, and that would be cross-cutting with the feature that we have for the decline in enrollment at the high school. I can see it relating to what Richard was saying before about like developing more engaging programming there. Okay, so I'm gonna put a little placeholder so we don't forget it, but it's not gonna be a full-fledged strategy yet. So that's a potential for exchange school. All right, I know there's a typo there. We'll get back to it. So how does this sound for the feature? Opportunity for greater cultural inclusion via outreach programming, recreational activities, etc., for both visitors and potential prospective residents of Chester.
I like that a lot.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's not it's not that succinct, but it gets that a lot.
Corinne, just to add to the point on Gateway, outreach from Gateway could be significant in that we have excess capacity in our schools, so that we can certainly have more students coming in. But if you look at the future of our population growing older, we do want to attract younger families.
Right.
So it all sort of meshes together. We have an educational opportunity here for young families and a quality of life that could be attractive for folks to want to come to this area.
I would also add in there just somehow economic development or growth or whatever, because I think that's an important word where people can feel that they can come in and really make an economic contribution by, bringing ideas, money, enterprise to our community. So however we can say that in a succinct way, I think would capture it all.
All right, I added business development in there.
Okay.
So, and I would just say that also starts to tie into some other features that we haven't gone into yet. So if everybody's okay with it, I'm going to go back to the features list and move down here because we're starting to get into strategies, and I want to make sure we cover everything. So that was climate vulnerable residents. Then we have plans and regulations. Again, the blue strategies that are already in here were, I think, largely in this scenario, pulled from Meredith's conversations with you all and other stakeholders in Chester. So plans and regulations, obviously, those have a big effect on social concerns. Emergency services and volunteers, historical buildings, specifically noted to be vulnerable to the river channel and flooding. I'm imagining there might also be some other items there, such as like being in need of repair, or maybe there's some mold issues in some of them, or maybe they need air conditioning or something like that. regional services. So consider medical, waste management, food assistance, etc. I'm sure there's others. Land value / tax rates. Meredith, is that something that came out of your conversations? It could also, there was a particular slideshow that I shared with Emily that I found that was developed, I think 2 years ago, and maybe it came from that.
The land value and tax rate?
Yep.
Well, I know that there's been a lot of discussion with the hill towns about primarily when land is protected and how that affects those rates. And there's hope that that will result in a better equal way of moving forward so that there's less resistance to land protection.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that that's where that was focused.
Okay. Local economy is one, and that's pretty broad intentionally. Pride and sense of place, the open space and recreation plan specifically, Littleton Reservoir in the recreation area. And then we got it, and then now we're into the ones that we just developed. So that's the Chester Elementary School growing 7%, the significant decline in enrollment in the high school, the potential for climate migration, and the opportunity for greater cultural inclusion. Any others to add here? We can also, you know, if things come up later, we can add them too.
Corinne, I'm not able to read this, so I can't tell if one of the categories relates to transportation or if that's in an upcoming segment.
I have not read anything specifically about transportation. We do have the regional services. So are you referring to like PBTA and shared sort of transit routes?
I am. Could I just briefly check that box? Just briefly. You're right. We do have FERTA, but it's an underperforming service at best. And,
FERTA?
Yes.
Franklin Regional
Oh, okay, right.
Transit.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the Huntington COA van.
Yeah.
What's known as here.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a good point, Bob, because there's that whole transportation climate initiative.
Yes. What brought this to mind immediately this morning was your quoting of the stats. I think you said projection for 2040 for Chester is roughly about 40% will be over 60. So that immediately makes me think of the challenges that we have had here due to lack of transportation, which continues to emerge and remains unaddressed. And one of the strategies could be linking to BRTA, Berkshire Regional Transit Authority. Just recently, MassDOT has made that recommendation, and I think it has been adopted by the legislature to allow bordering communities cross-county access. And of course, Chester borders Berkshire County. So what's my point? I'm not sure, other than we need more services, public transportation services. Based on your projections, it's going to increase. So I just wanted to tick that box, and thank you for letting me say that.
All right, so I'm writing here. I think this is great because we can definitely start moving into strategies now. So what I'm taking from what you said is encourage FERTA to link with BRTA to enhance availability of public transit routes.
It wouldn't be a connection between the RTAs, I don't think. It would be a connection fostered by the town, Chester, and of course that could include Blandford and Middlefield because they both abut Berkshire County too. I think the outreach has to come from the town to BRTA.
Okay, all right. So this would be for Chester then. So it would be reach out to BRTA to assess the feasibility of, or do we just want to say
to arrange for cross-county access, which I believe has been approved by the legislature.
Yeah, so it's sort of giving more power to that from the town, sort of allowing those overlapping service areas.
Yes.
And let's make sure we keep connected to the a rail stop in Chester. I know
Oh,
we
that's
talked
right,
about it
east-west.
before, but let us not forget that, because that creates the entire integrated loop that's necessary to give us what we need transportation wide and what's going to benefit the region and the Commonwealth. What happened?
Okay, so I am writing, advocate for increased public transit to assist the aging population and connectivity generally to Chester. So it's, you know, both for the aging population, but also anyone who wants to get to and from Chester. And that's going to be multi-pronged by reaching out to BERTA to arrange for cross-country access, which has already been approved by the legislature via public transit, and by continuing to advocate for east-west rail. What do we call that?
With the stop in Chester, restoring its primacy as the hub of the hill towns.
All right. So east-west rail, is that expansion or is it just like creation? I think it's expansion, right?
Well, it's
An addition of daily service.
restoration. I
Yeah.
would say.
Creation for east-west rail.
And Meredith noted in the chat that it also is, would make both living in and visiting Chester more viable and dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Exactly.
a lot of these are going to connect to a lot of they're going to be multi-feature associated. Unfortunately, the way that the matrix is set up, it's not really a great way of showing that. So what I think I'll do here is say,
I had seen this wonderful thing in a small towns in Europe that wondered why they weren't visited the way that other towns were. And they got a grant to have a performance, and they were just performed by the locals. And it was a certain time of day. So if you were a farmer, you drop your whatever and you go to the train station, and they had this little event that each town developed on their own. So as the train went by, they would do this fabulous something, trying to encourage people to get off in that town. And I thought that would be such a great thing. It's like,
Oh,
if you're going
great.
by, don't miss us. But that it was both specific to the town and what their happiness was, or their best event or whatever.
yeah.
And some of them were, you know, cardboard horses that charged through a field, and another one was a bunch of flags and dancing.
I'm
And
sure there had to have been some cheese somewhere, right? Because it's
I'm
Europe.
sure there was too.
Yeah.
Right on, Meredith.
Yeah, there's this whole program in Pennsylvania called nature-based placemaking. And one of the sort of, threads is that the best places for living are also places worth visiting. So it ties to, you know, living and attracting visitors, but making it good for the people who live there.
Meredith, don't forget, we have President Dave Pierce on the deck as the trains go by.
Right. And he's an icon.
I'm wondering if maybe that's why they're not stopping.
Get away. Okay, so I actually connected to the I don't know if you all can see this, but I actually connected to the transit strategy for many of the features. So the potential for climate migration, that seems directly related there. Pride and sense of place, the railroad stop, of course, and, you know, with its rich history in Chester, the local economy, and then regional services. But I'm just spelling it out here. So, okay, that's a really great one. What other strategies is anyone thinking about for any of these features?
Did you leave out the restoration of the rail stop?
I have at the very bottom here, and by continuing to advocate for east-west rail restoration with an emphasis on the Chester stop.
Oh, great. Oh, I didn't see it. I can't find it on my screen, but that's okay. As long
Okay.
as-
Yeah, the spreadsheet is, I think, small when I share the screen on everybody's, and it's hard to follow along if you just have it up on your own too. So
yeah,
I'm trying to read everything aloud.
that's great.
It might be good though, Corinne, in the title of societal to start
So I
with.
have to ask this question, Andy or Meredith, do we want to have anything in here related to the Highlands Footpath?
I think it would be appropriate. I mean, it certainly is an attractive recreational feature of Chester. With all of our open space, with hiking paths going through, it's attracting visitors and potential residents.
And that I understand all of the footpaths are going to be integrated. Is that not correct, Andy?
Well, the ultimate goal is to connect the various communities together, you know, from Lee to Beckett to Middlefield to Chester to Huntington, all the way up to Worthington and so forth. So there'd be interconnected trails.
And also it's my understanding that all of the trails in Chester would interconnect, so you could actually just hike the day in Chester and not cover the same ground twice, as I understand it. Maybe I have it wrong, but that's I think a real strength and a unique thing in Chester.
Well, yes, and it would connect the major hiking areas of Keystone Arches with Gobble Mountain, Blandford, Chester State Forest, Sanderson Brook Falls, and so forth. Those would all be interconnected as time goes by.
Yes, great.
Yeah, and I think in thinking about MVP, that one of the things there is sort of providing access to healthy movement or, interconnection with other communities, that there's a resilience in that. I don't know that it will end up being an MVP action, but.
Does it make sense to have just given the way everybody's talking about it, I'm wondering if it makes sense to have the Highlands Footpath be a feature or to actually be associated with strategies for existing features? Because if there's nothing, I mean, I guess a strategy for the Highlands Footpath itself would be just like continue working on it. But maybe it makes more sense to use the Highlands Footpath as a strategy for the local economic development feature, or for the opportunities for, or definitely the open space and recreation plan, or the pride and sense of place, etc.
Yes, and all of the above, and as well as we had talked earlier about potential emergent evacuation sites, a way to get out of the flood-prone areas if there's a severe emergency where the immediate evacuation is necessary because they can go to higher ground.
May I make a suggestion?
Yes, of course.
So me and my husband, we drive around a lot, so we like to look at other things. But so Holyoke has like these awesome solar rechargeable type bikes. And it would be awesome to see some more actual sidewalks. So I know if I go up like the main street, down the street from like where the town hall is, there's a whole like side there. It's got some walkway, but then it doesn't, and then the other side doesn't. But if there was like a sidewalk path, and then also with like the bikes that are solar, so it's very energy efficient, utilizing those great energy efficiencies. Also with the hiking, possibly integrating some type of bike paths along some of those. So when someone comes off of the train station, they could also get onto a bike, rent a bike, and you can go up some of the trails and paths and whatnot. I didn't know if maybe that was something.
Laura, Patty and I actually, Patty, what was the name of that report that we wrote? I forget, but 2 years ago, we worked in Chester to study exactly, well, so to speak, to study exactly what you're talking about, where we did walk audits with Andy. I believe you were part of it, and probably a few other people on this call as well. As part of, or in collaboration with Healthy Hampshire, but the idea was to see where roads could be more safe for local pedestrian and bicycle traffic, but also to enhance the connected network of trails, which Richard and Andy were just talking about as well. And so,
Yeah.
I think you're like hitting on something which is nascent, I'll say, right now in Chester. I'm wondering if there's, and Laura, this is something where I'm looking for input from you, and I'm also wanting to not move so quickly past the Highlands Footpath conversation that we were just talking about. You might see that in the features here, I wrote recreation-based economy, which is something that came up in the first presentation as something that, you know, is already being talked about in Chester, I think specifically with the Highlands Footpath, but then also just all of these, you know, all the other passive and active recreation opportunities that exist in town. It seems like, Laura, what you're bringing up would be a great tie-in with the Highlands Footpath in terms of people knowing that they could eventually take the train out to Chester, or right now could drive out to Chester, do some hiking, hop on a bike, you know, bike over to the common table, you know, or something like that for dinner. I'm wondering if these are all tied together in this feature, or if, Laura, you're also sort of talking about, if what you're talking about may also be separate, where it's just like literally safety with sidewalks.
I see a lot of people doing a lot of hiking, walking along up and down the streets. A lot of people do a lot of cleanups. I know there's a volunteer cleanup for roads in the next couple of weekends and whatnot. So, I mean, it would give like a designated type of area so you can have multiple people and families go along the sidewalks to enjoy like the train tracks and going and connecting into the hiking paths.
So what if,
So in like encouragement of healthy living,
yeah,
actively living.
this also ties into the regulations, the plans and regulations feature too, where like you might want to encourage that whenever there's like that implementation of, I don't know, complete streets. I don't know if that's something you've talked about. I don't know where that stands in Chester, but integration of like pedestrian amenities is considered with capital improvement plan budgeting. There's a lot of ideas right now. They're all going to be different strategies, and I'm trying to organize them. So maybe first we'll say something along the lines of, well, first, how do people feel about the recreation-based economy being a feature? Is that agreed upon, or did I sort of take that in a direction nobody wanted?
It might be early. It might be too early for it.
Well, you know, I agree. It's a goal that we should be striving for, and that I agree with Laura. I think, and with what you just said about pedestrian amenities, cycling amenities, and so on, and have an eye on what's possible. Excuse me. So, for example, as we look at repaving Middlefield Road, and I'm no expert on this, but we put in sidewalks a few years ago, but they are not in particularly great shape. But as we repave, we have to look at lining those roads, painting those roads, perhaps with some bicycle lanes. I know it's a narrow road and it's difficult and so on, but it's something worth looking at. And I think for relatively small amount of money, we could maybe work towards that goal of integrating those pedestrian and cycling amenities and connecting them to the integrated hiking trails and other Keystone Arches and the like. So it's a challenge, but I think if we keep our eyes on that, there's some possibilities there that we could do it in the shorter term rather than the longer term.
I completely agree. I think Laura's vision for the future is excellent and should be considered in our ongoing category as part of other things. And Corinne, if I could, I mentioned to you before I have to jump off, so I apologize. I have to do that. And I just want to thank you so much and the rest of your team. Meredith, Patty, thank you so much. Great job. Keep it up. And Corinne, talk to Andy about moving to Chester. Have a great day.
You know what? I have actually, I've actually looked at a map of Chester with my fiance before and have said, like, can you imagine? Like,
Okay.
it's something to consider for the future. So,
Right. Talk to Andy.
all right.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Bob.
Thank
So
you.
that's actually a good time check. It's 10:37. I think we're coming up with some really great strategies. I don't want to prematurely cut us off at 11 if people have the ability to stay after that, but I also want to make sure we're respectful of time. So I'm thinking maybe this recreation-based economy feature should be changed, but I don't know. It's no longer just the Highlands Footpath. So I don't know really what to call this.
And why do you feel that it needs to be changed?
Oh, well, I just asked if people agreed with it and I didn't really hear any affirmative.
Okay. I was just thinking that ties in both to what Lori was talking about in terms of just continuing to develop, and I wrote it in the chat, that continue to develop connected hiking and loop trails, bike loops, and safe sidewalks. It would be nice for me in terms of thinking about municipal vulnerability planning and nature-based solutions to put in pervious surfaces somewhere so that we're not always thinking of concrete when we think of producing trails that are accessible. You may also find that they're a little easier to incorporate into the highway department's cleaning and snow removal if they're not set up in the way that we think of classically as a sidewalk, but more a wider area that's designated for walking and bike use.
Do you feel like that, when I think of that, I think it could go with this plans and regulations, because it's sort of like what's guiding the construction and design aspect of like a right-of-way, facilities within the right-of-way. Do you agree with that, or do you think it should be, do you think it should go with a different feature?
I'll leave that with Chester residents.
And I think that that one category should be outdoor recreation-based quality of life.
Down here?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's a great way of putting it. So outdoor recreation-based.
That would also help with the elderly too, to get active and motivated, especially with those disparities that come along with older age. So that's really great. I like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
and for MVP, I think it's important to have that kind of health and, connection to a vulnerable population in your midst. So I think that would be good.
Patty, do you remember what the name of that report was?
No.
I want to put a placeholder.
Yeah.
I want to put a placeholder in here for this, because I think if you can show, if this ends up being something that you write a grant for, whether it's MVP action grant or something else, if you can show that it's something that you've been considering and that you've already done some analysis around, that's like a resource to show that you're serious and you're committed to it. So I think it will be important to link to that. And there might be ones that I don't know about too. It's just that I happen to work on this one. So I'll find the name of that and put it in. We might also, there might be.
I had one other thing. I would just add to what Andy said, and I'm not wedded to the language I'm using. I'm just trying to give an idea based on what we've been discussing, that in addition to the outdoor recreation-based quality of life, it's about, and I don't think this is the right way to say it, maybe it is, inner community mobility. In other words, where people can get around the community, as Laura was saying, with bicycling and walking and pedestrian and so on. And what Meredith said, I think is really, really interesting, because they've already done that. I've seen it in Lenox, where they just repaved a road and they didn't put curbing in, but they put marked sidewalks in and marked bicycle lanes in that will keep people safe, but it actually is it easier for the highway to plow and give mobility 12 months a year. We'll take care of the snow season. Now we have sidewalks that have to be shoveled and all of that, and some get shoveled and some don't, and so on. and they usually get banged up by the snowplows. But they have it in Lenox where most of it is even with the road, and they just go in there and plow everything at once, but they still have the marked lanes somehow. So I'm not sure of this, but I think we have to. I think recreation's a key part of it, but I think the internal mobility within the town for other than cars and the like is an important consideration.
Okay, so Richard, what I'm thinking here is that, sorry, I'm just making this so people can read it. What I'm thinking here is that there had been previously a feature called plans and regulations. I have rewritten that to say plans and regulations and designing for multimodal and accessible connectivity. And so what I'm putting in is explicitly allow for permeable pavement to protect natural resources. And this is from what Meredith was just saying, and then I'll put in what you were just saying. So allow to protect natural resources, reduce urban heat island effect, and Meredith, let me know if I'm forgetting something there. And then Richard, what you were just saying is implement design solutions to, I'm sorry, I was writing as you were talking, so I'm forgetting exactly how you phrased it, but
optimize the utility of existing roadways and sidewalks for multi-purpose use or something like that, so that just by looking at redesigning them, perhaps we can get more optimized utility from them.
Yeah.
Rather than sticking with a conventional roadway system and then always trying to repair broken sidewalks that get damaged. Not criticizing anybody, they get damaged by snowplows and so on. But if it was all roadway and somehow they were marked safely, maybe it would be better. I'm not an expert, so I don't know how you do that, but I know it's being done other places, and I use the Lenox, I think it's Walker Street, as an example that might be helpful.
Richard, where is Chester on the complete streets? I think when Corinne and I were working there on that report and the walkability, you were in process on the analysis. Is that right?
I'm sorry, I'm not following you. What was your question? I'm sorry.
About the complete streets work that the state, they have incentives for developing a list of priorities and then applying for funding in the Complete Streets program. And I think Chester was in process on that.
Yeah, I'm not up on that. Maybe Kathy's on it. She can answer that better.
I'll be honest with you, since I've been there, I haven't seen anything about that at all. I've looked into the Complete Streets, and I know you're now required to take classes before you can apply for it. So, and I haven't had the availability to do that. So I don't know where we sit with it. All this would be excellent to tie in to a Complete Streets program. It's just putting all the pieces together.
Yeah.
So one of the, just as another resource, it doesn't answer the Complete Streets question, which is obviously a great, in and of itself, it's a great resource in providing funding, but it does have its own hurdles. Is that when Patty and I were working on this report for connectivity within Chester Center, one resource that we used was a design guide that had been written by Alta Planning for Hampshire County specifically, but there's no, it's just that an organization in Hampshire County hired them, but it was for rural Complete Streets implementation, because so many of the Complete Streets strategies are centered around high volume, streets that have 4 lanes or, things like that, and that need 8-foot sidewalks, and which is just not the case in most of Chester, if any of Chester. So there's this resource that Alta Planning wrote that's called Complete Streets Plan. It's called something like this: Complete Streets Planning for Rural and Suburban Communities in Hampshire County. And that is a really great little report that's available online. We can also, what I was going to say before is that when we do the public engagement piece of this, Patty and I can make available the report that we wrote, and then also this Alta report just as sort of supplemental material that shows how in a rural community like Chester, there, you know, you can do bike sharrows on lanes instead of actually creating a bike lane, or, you know, like instead of installing an 8-foot sidewalk for the throngs of people that, you know, there just won't be ever walking down one street at the same time in Chester. You could do a, I think what Richard was referring to, which is more of a pedestrian and bike sharrow. There's there's safety concerns to consider for all of this, but what I'm getting at is that there is already a design guideline for rural context specific complete street style design. And it's a great place to look for coming up with projects along these lines.
Corinne, it seems to me that we've talked an awful lot about some economic development and designing things that will attract more visitors and residents to Chester, which in a sense increases our vulnerability. So I think from a planning standpoint, we should be looking at how do we cope with the potential migration that's coming to our area. It's great to improve things, but knowing that's going to attract more residents and visitors, and we're really supposed to be focused on vulnerability. How do we plan for that smartly going forward?
Great point, and natural segue. So Andy, was it you or someone previously had mentioned like smart growth strategies? Was that you or someone else?
Yeah, that was Andy.
Yes, I mentioned it.
So did you want to explain that a little bit more? Or I don't know if everyone here knows what smart growth is, or if there was certain aspects of that you were more referencing.
Well, again, it looks at population change in an area and how we would like to grow with more green industry. As far as zoning, our zoning laws in order to adapt to that. And what do we see the community being in 20 to 30 years from now? And how do we plan for that in the best way forward, considering the vulnerability part of it?
So I would say from just from what we know, which is very little about climate migration right now, and then also, so there's sort of like an understanding or sort of being able to try and model or predict what might happen, and then there's so that you are making like evidence-based, so to speak, I guess, decisions when you go to update your zoning, et cetera. So there's that aspect of it, which is the sort of like analysis aspect. And then there's the actual regulatory review and updates. So to me, it sounds like sort of a two-pronged strategy, where maybe the first prong is conduct a assessment of potential for climate migration and its effect on Chester's population in the future, or something like that. And then the second piece is conduct a zoning and development. So like that would be, subdivision rules and regulations and, anything else related to development, regulatory review to ensure Chester's readiness for increased development or increased population. How does that sound?
Well, it sounds good. And part of it really is a region-wide study and analysis. And it's not just Chester. I mean, this is going to affect communities all around us. And what are the best practices? How should we be looking at it? I mean, I think in the last 20 to 30 years, we've lost population, and primarily young families, because of jobs and because of lack of high-speed internet. Well, now we have high-speed internet. We also have a lot of work based in homes, so that the jobs issue has been mitigated. So there is a real possibility of some growth coming along.
I agree with everything that's been said and the way you propose to put it down and, you know, to record that. I agree with what Andy said and what you've said.
Okay, I'm just writing this and then we'll read it out loud. This is not elegantly worded, but I'm just getting the ideas down right now.
Corinne, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I've just spent 5 minutes trying to unmute.
Oh my God.
I just wanted to suggest something here because I don't think it's not MVP eligible, but I think it's an important exercise. And maybe you've already done this to some extent, but I've been working with some other communities a lot, and I think zoning changes are really tough. They're a heavy lift. But I think if you have some vision behind what you want to be and what you want to look like, given a certain amount of growth, I think that first step Corinne talks about is assessing what that potential and what that might look like, that climate migration, and then doing some visioning around Chester Center and the surroundings and sort of connections, but also where you want to focus more density. And just really think that through. That then when you go to the zoning, you're actually writing about something that you're visualizing, you're already understanding in your heads what it will look like. And you're writing, regulatory elements that comport with what you want to have happen. And there's a land use planning grants that the state has that would be a really great source for that kind of funding and thinking.
Well, I know that there are models for cluster zoning that have been discussed before and kind of put on hold in many communities, I guess, including our own community. And maybe it's something that needs to be revisited because we can locate perhaps cluster zoning in areas that because we're pretty, there's limited space to develop anything down in the valley in the existing village. But boy, we have a beautiful historic village there. But I think similar kind of village could be replicated perhaps in the more extended areas of the valley and of the town if done right. But we've never really had a full discussion of it, but we're aware of that, having been on the planning board for years, of the potential for cluster zoning. And I don't know how that's progressing in other parts of the state, or if it's something that ought to be considered as part of vulnerability planning.
Richard, that's a great point. And what you may not know is that Pioneer Valley Planning Commission was awarded one of those land use planning grants that Patty was just mentioning to develop a model cluster development or open space recreation development. There's many different names for it. Model bylaw that is specific to the unique needs of communities within our region. So we'll sort of be considering both, if a more urban and or suburban community wanted to adopt this, like what should they be thinking about? But then if a more rural community wanted to adopt it, what are the unique challenges and opportunities present in those areas, such as, a reliance on septic systems, et cetera. So we are going to be actively working on that starting this fiscal year, July 1st. And Patty, I don't know, Patty, I don't know if you know if if we're looking for people, for communities to join that working group, or if the working group is sort of formed, but then we'll be sharing the results of it. I wasn't as up to date on that aspect of it.
Well, I think there are some communities already in the fold, just the Valley Development Council, but I think having rural perspective on this is really important. And I don't know how many rural communities are on that, in that group right now.
Yeah, I think right now it's like, this is just talking off the top of my head, but I think it's like Hatfield and Belchertown maybe. So they're not, we don't have, in my understanding, any communities that are more like hill town communities. But we can definitely be in touch with you on that as we get started. Either way, we'll be keeping all of our communities appraised of the sort of results of that, and it will be a resource that's available to everybody. It's not something we can start to work on this fiscal year, so we haven't sat down with it yet.
Do you envision incentive possibilities for communities that go in that direction?
Do you mean like
Possible cluster zoning, cluster development that has a real positive in terms of addressing vulnerability and economic development issues and need for housing and so on?
Yes.
Having cluster incentives, for want of a better way to say it.
Right. This had its genesis with Hatfield that has something on the books and no one was really using it. So the idea of incentives or enabling this as, a typical course of action rather than sort of, typical subdivision development are really important considerations in developing the model.
Right. I think a big thing that communities will have to decide. One thing that we're seeing across the state is that there's a lot of communities that have this type of availability, or that, like they have it available for developers to choose this, but that it's not very popular just because it's, changing business as usual. And if it's a lot of communities make it available by special permit, so it makes it harder for developers. So why would they do it? And then some communities it's by right, but if they're more used to designing a traditional subdivision, what are the incentives that would then lead them to choose their development as opposed to traditional subdivision? And then the third option is that you can make it the de facto form of development in your community, and a developer would have to apply for a special permit to do a traditional subdivision. If you are, or at least in certain zoning districts in your community. If you're really serious about this being the way that you want to encourage development within your community. So there's all those sorts of considerations. And when we write the model, we'll be writing this as a model. So there will be a lot of commentary folded into the document. There will be the model text itself, and then sort of like discourse about that, explaining different options and when you might choose one and one or the other. So all of those, you'll be able to have a very informed conversation with your community about those topics.
It would be nice if there was also a economic calculation rolled into your planning, where it showed communities what the cost savings are when they only have one bus stop for a block of houses.
So Corinne, you probably noticed that we're at 11.
I didn't.
We're scheduled until noon though, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh.
I've just been saying that we probably wouldn't go all the way to noon. So I'm just trying to be respectful of everybody's time. But Meredith, I think that's interesting. The grant has already been awarded and the time has sort of been allocated in there. And I have not looked at this budget in a long time, but there's probably some flexibility where we consider something like that.
I just think those are costs that towns often don't remember to kind of roll into their planning. That if there are fewer roads that they have to drive their bus on, fewer roads that they have to address because a number of houses are built and a larger portion of land is protected or made accessible to people to enjoy, but not fractured landscape wise. It also becomes appealing to some large landowners that don't want to see their land be divided in a way that fragments the landscape and interrupts the natural resources but they're willing to consider a cluster development that protects the land and still serves both the community's needs and their needs.
Yeah, for sure. It's a good point. And it also relates to like the storms, like sewer infrastructure and you know, if your community has that, or also stormwater infrastructure and piping, there's just all sorts of infrastructural savings that can be for both the developer and the town eventually once, you know, the roads become accepted town roads or something like that, you know, that they can save. So being cognizant of time, I'm just going to read back to you what we just wrote because there's a lot in there, and then we can start to look at other strategies. So this was in the potential for climate migration feature, and two-pronged strategy. One is partner with other communities in the region to conduct an analysis and model potential climate migration, especially in light of the advent of high-speed internet availability and pandemic migration being already attracting people, you know, having the potential to attract people to these areas, as opposed to the sort of slow pull of climate migration, with the goal of understanding potential population increase and what needs new residents may have. Include a visioning specific to each community of what current residents may want to preserve and where they may want to concentrate new development and density. And then the second prong is to use the results of this analysis and visioning to conduct local regulatory review of zoning and development code to ensure that Chester is ready to welcome an influx of new residents and provide for their needs and amplify potential economic benefits.
Sounds good.
Great. Okay.
That's great. That's good.
Okay, great.
It seems like there should be amplify their needs while protecting the natural resources might want to be tucked in there.
Yes.
Under the first prong here, include visioning specific to each community of what current residents may want to preserve.
I was
So,
thinking in the second bullet, developing codes to ensure Chester is ready and welcome an influx of new residents and provide for their needs. Yeah, I'm not sure. You can look at that, but I want to keep reminding that both for the sake of the MVP, as well as for what Chester has that is unique to in all of that development, that there's an awareness that you're trying to protect the natural resources.
I was saying while preserving natural resources and ensuring climate resilient development.
I would just not to be too picky or to try to wordsmith it. I'd try to take out influx because sometimes people get scared of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
welcome new resident. Welcome new resident. Yeah.
Okay, great. That's a good point. I also just want to say quickly that I really appreciate how this conversation is going around this topic. It's not, I think to Richard's point, we, you know, like sometimes people they like things the way they are and they live there because they like it, and it's hard to develop strategies that seem to promote welcoming change. I think this has been a very positive spin on what is both potential to be very beneficial for the town, and also, if not dealt with, could also be detrimental to the town, and you're finding ways of making it just totally beneficial. So I appreciate that. Okay, what else? Make this. We have regional services as a feature. We have land value and tax rates, the reservoir, Littleville Reservoir and Recreation Area, Chester Elementary, the population growth of 7%. There's no strategies associated with that yet. The significant decline in high school enrollments. Let's go. We had actually started to draft one there, and then I stopped us. So we had this potential for exchange, potential for what do you call that? Student exchange? Is that what you call it, a student exchange?
Exchange student.
Exchange, thank you. It's like something sounds wrong here. Okay, potential for exchange student programming with the high school. And then we noted that there is an excess capacity in schools allow for ability to attract younger families and also exchange students. So
Really tie in from the last conversation that we had, the last meeting that we had. Ms. Babcock had mentioned, putting some educational outreach to the high school to possibly get them involved as well, and learning about the ecosystems and the environment and whatnot. Could that be also integrated into this social aspect for that line?
Right. Yeah, there was that whole strategy about more robust environmental programming as well. Okay, develop. So work with.
I think it was Andy that had mentioned that they had an outdoor club that was in development, and the Highlands Footpath had been guiding some trips with them, and I think a continuation of that is a wonderful idea.
So
I would be frankly use that outdoor club as the minimal base. I think that, as I have thought for many years from the time I was superintendent here, that it could be that the curriculum could be based on outward bound expeditionary learning, which is a validated curriculum, and that would be an attraction to people that are both here and people that would want to come to Chester, because it could, and to the hill towns, because it could create a different kind of an opportunity for education. And education will never go back to the old normal. It will have to find a new normal, and I submit it will be based on experiential education outdoors, along the lines of expeditionary learning. And that's a validated curriculum that's out there nationally and being done in a number of places around the country with great success.
Absolutely love that. I absolutely love that. I taught a part of the STEM program to third grade, how to make their own yogurt at Lee Elementary School many years ago in my honors micro class. So that would be wonderful. I'd love to teach some kids about the spawning brook here, and they can actually see the fish. It's really a beautiful sight. I think the kids would absolutely love it. I know mine do. That's awesome, Richard.
Yeah, some of that can also be worked with the schools, and they can always reach out to Mass Wildlife for that, because I've worked with some schools on some science programs and doing outside learning with the resources that are available around the schools. I've worked with Hampshire Regional, I've worked with Wacona, so there's definitely a possibility for that. We just never get the outreach from the schools themselves to do that. So if we can kind of give them the boost that there is options like that, that would be great.
I just enrolled my son to the Gateway Regional High School, so I will be outreaching to them soon.
Yes, poke at those science teachers.
I surely will. Thank you.
Okay, so I've been trying to combine all these things. So I have worked with the high school administration to explore the potential for developing more robust cultural and environmental curriculum, including exchange student programming, outward bound type curriculum for experiential learning, and capitalize on Chester/Gateway's natural assets to retain and attract students. Develop school district as an attractive alternative educational model.
Say the last thing again. I'm sorry, last few words.
Develop the school district as an attractive alternative educational model. Maybe it shouldn't say model, but educational opportunity or something.
Yeah, and where you have expeditionary learning, you might want to mention validated expeditionary learning model.
I have outward bound type. So what you're saying sounds more specific. I mean, sounds more correct than outward bound type. So can you say it again?
Outward bound / And you could just say validated expeditionary learning curriculum.
Validated
Expeditionary learning curriculum.
Okay, great.
You should be able to find that on the internet so you could get more information on that.
Okay.
You know, in terms of where it is right now, I haven't been in touch with it for a number of years. So.
Mhm.
I do have a question too. Could we also possibly like do a community-based experiential type of learning? A lot of what I've learned from the year of living here is that a lot of people here love giving back to their communities, and they volunteer so much of their time. Could there be a possibility of incorporating the community to learn, also incorporating the elderly that do live here with also the younger generation to learn and bounce ideas and off of one another and gain that connectedness?
Well, Laura is absolutely right on with that one. And I would just use the term intergenerational learning so that you get people from young to old learning together and learning independently.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Now, through the discussions that I've had, there was some talk of perhaps acquiring the old elementary school or expanding at the present location, having the library and the town offices in the same building might allow for some of what you were talking about, getting more families involved. So supplying childcare during meeting times or activities that include children so that their parents can attend more of the committee meetings. I don't know where that would fit in, but that was something that came up in the discussions.
Yeah, well, now I'll put my selectman's hat on and speak for myself as a selectman, but I sense that my colleagues would be in line with this, as we're working very hard with Kathy and others to make sure that we can keep that elementary school and renovate it so that it has multi-purpose uses for all of the things that you've just mentioned, Meredith, and then some that we haven't even talked about.
What was that building?
Excuse me?
What was the building?
The old Chester Elementary School, which is a beautiful monument to things past and a beautiful monument going into the future. But we just have to bring it up to date in terms of the various uses that we can put it to and finding the funding to make that happen. And I personally believe that there will be great support in the community for that, and should be outside as well. It's in a very prominent position in the community, just its location in the village. For when our forebears built that place, they were making a statement about what is of value, and we have to make sure that that is preserved, renovated, preserved, and made to be a very significant community enterprise.
Okay. So I added that as a feature, the old elementary school. And what I have here is renovate and preserve the old school to be a community building with shared use agreements for education, meetings, gatherings, etc.
And town offices, which we have very limited space, but it's a good sized building with plenty of square footage, and it'll be a substantial investment in the future of our community, and the timing is perfect. And hopefully we can have that done so that it's complete by the 250th anniversary, if not before. We should try to move that along as quickly as possible, and there are plenty of people excited about it. Now, we have a lot of study to do. I mean, there's a lot of, we have to really explore the viability of it with using, a design grant, planning grant, whatever is required to really study technically and engineering point of view what it's going to take to make that building useful, but it's in decent condition. It just needs a lot of updating.
Mhm. All right. So let's see, there's some strategies for which we haven't written anything, and that's as before, that's okay. We can either, decide that they don't need any strategies today, or, oh, was somebody saying something? Okay. So one is the communications, alerts, and technology. We heard from several of you before that you feel like it's really working. So it could be that there's no strategy needed here right now. One is the land value and tax rates. Another is, let's see, the open space and recreation plan. One is the Littleville Reservoir and Recreation Area. And then we have the Chester Elementary School student population growing. And I think those are the only ones that don't have strategies right now. So does anybody have anything for those, or?
Have anything for what? I'm sorry.
Any of the strategies or the features that don't
Okay.
currently have strategies. So I can read those again. Communications, land value tax rates, the reservoir and recreation area, and the elementary student population growing.
Well, the strategy on the land values and that disappeared somehow. Oh, I see it. Okay, I'm sorry. Land values and tax, that's an ongoing effort. If Andy's on, he can speak to that, with RG, and we're in the whole reassessment process. Andy?
Yeah, I think one of the strategies on the land value has to do with state-owned land. And I know Senator Hines is looking at revising the formula for how that compensation goes. Right now, most of that compensation goes to the eastern part of the state, whereas they value large tracts of forest in the western part of the state very low. That needs to be reversed because they're very valuable lands as far as the sustainability of the Commonwealth goes. And that's really affected us by not getting our share of funds from the state on state-owned land in the pilot program.
Andy, have you been able to do any analysis on that, sort of what that looks like for Chester?
Well, I have.
Yeah.
I've certainly done an analysis of how detrimental it is right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've got, I think there's $31 million the state has to appropriate for those land values. And the vast lion's share of that goes to the wealthier communities in the eastern part of the state because they value their land so highly. And they've treated large tracts of land with very low values in the western part of the state. Senator Hines knows that. It's going to be a political football trying to get that changed, but it desperately needs to be changed. I mean, just to give you an example, I mean, there's a community on one of the island, Martha's Vineyard, that has less land state-owned than Chester does. They get about $1.2 million in pilot funds. Chester has far more land than that. Granted that it's less valuable real estate-wise. We get $16,000.
Wow.
So, I mean, the disparity is almost obscene if you take a look at it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of political chips going on here as to how that money is distributed, but it needs to be much more fairly accounted for.
Mm-hmm.
I would take out the almost and just go right to obscene, Andy.
I would agree with that.
and we are in my view the Costa Rica of the Commonwealth. That is, we have so much land available and it's so valuable in terms of climate change and the preservation of our planet that as the world supports the rainforests in Costa Rica, Boston should support the equivalent in Western Mass, particularly in Chester, where we have so much acreage, as Andy says, and we're getting so little for it in return. And that has to change.
So I
I
have
mean-
here, oh, go ahead.
I mean, the real challenge with land values and tax rates is about 70% of Chester's open space protected. I mean, we have great tracts of land like the Nature Conservancy and New England Forest Land and so forth. They pay zero in taxes. So even though environmentally it's very nice to have that much open space, it detracts from our tax base and it causes our tax rates to go up. So that's a real challenge for us. We have quite a bit of land in Chapter 61 as well, which up to 90% of the tax base is eaten up from the town. So I'm not sure what the solution is on that. I've always thought that the state should participate in Chapter 61 tax reductions, but no, they put that entire burden on the towns. So there's areas like that that should be explored.
I
I
agree.
think we need to make T-shirts that say Chesterica.
Yeah, maybe through sale of those, you can make back the lost tax revenues.
That's great. That's beautiful, Meredith.
So, okay, so what I have here, I'm wondering how to put in that second part, Andy, that you were just talking about with Chapter 61, but we have continue working with Senator Hines to revise pilot land valuations to ensure large tracts of forested land in the western part of the state are valued higher for statewide resilience. And then would the Chapter 61 be worded similarly, where it's work with, I don't know if there's someone currently working on that, or if it's just like work with the state legislature or something to.
I've worked on it for over 20 years and have made zero progress. I don't have a lot of hope that can be changed, quite honestly. It's an eastern state, part of the state program, and they are inflexible of moving, that I've found.
So do you think there's no strategy that belongs on the spreadsheet for it then?
I think we should focus our attention on things that we have the ability to change.
Okay. Okay. So I guess I'm just going to open up this time now. If anybody has any strategies that they haven't seen on here, either related to features that we've already talked about or that we haven't talked about. I'm not going to pull teeth for strategies for the existing features that don't have anything right now. And if no one has anything, we can jump into prioritization too, but I want to make sure that people have one last chance to get their thoughts out.
I think the communications piece is going to be extremely important to get the words out to the individuals with everything that we're doing. Communication is really going to be a big, huge piece to get more for more people involved and whatnot. So I would say that that's like a high priority type thing too, really.
Do you have a strategy associated with it, or?
I mean, when the ownership, like for the town, just having a collective type of website, like it's on there, that from the different committees and the different departments, to have an official site that they can put all the information that they need to in that site for community outreaching, for educational purposes. It would really have to be like a collaborative type of motivation to kind of get it all in one space. I know social media platforms, they're extremely negative. Unfortunately, it's what a lot of people right now are utilizing to get their information. So it's always good to have the main source, watching over that information to make sure it's going out to everybody. I don't know. That's on the town level. I'm not there.
I would say tying in the librarian as well, just because that tends to be a person that's in contact with the larger community and more varied community members. You also have Chester on Track each year, and maybe there's a designated booth to sort of meet your representatives and learn about what's happened in the year. It might be a way for people to check in and learn about updates.
Is Chester on track like the local town celebration?
Yeah.
Okay, so I captured, ensure the website is updated and that all departments and committees keep the site updated with relevant news and information. Ensure residents know about and sign up for Code Red alerts, and have a booth at Chester on Track to ensure information is dispersed. Information about Code Red and about Code Red, elected officials, and events. How's that sound?
Yeah.
Okay.
What kind of platform would I guess discussing which kind of platform would be best? If it's not just on the town's website, but which platform would be best to utilize for everybody, for translational services as well?
Just say something. I think the town website is a perfect platform to put out any information that any of the committees, departments need to push out. As well, no social media such as Facebook can be, there's pros and there's a lot of cons. We've worked hard to build our website, and so I don't think we need to recreate the wheel there. Just as I've been saying, not to this group, but I've said to my departments and everything, committees, we'll get anything on there if it's sent to us, but we can't be going to everybody and going, oh, you have anything today to go on the website, that kind of thing. I would hate for to waste time trying to reinvent something that we already have that already works. We're only as good as the information that's given to us. And if people don't want to share the information, then that's, the point we're at for that.
How about links? How about like if we put links on the website to go to those different types of departments? What do you think?
Well, the departments each have their own page on the website. Again, if they don't put the information out there, it's not there to share.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
It might be fun. I don't know if the Chester Elementary goes to 5th grade. Is that correct? Yeah. It would be fun to have a program where all 5th graders learn how to access and navigate the town website. So they start to see that as a way that they can both contribute and receive information. Because if your parents aren't involved in town politics, it's really hard to even think that that exists.
I agree with what has been said, particularly with what Kathy said, that we don't want to reinvent the wheel, and we've got the medium to get that information out. But what is needed is something that we're reminded of all the time. That is, there are too few people to do too much work. And if we can somehow get a volunteer or volunteers that will really be laser focused on getting information and putting it on the website, and there can be some reasonable oversight of the work of the volunteers, but that would ensure getting more rather than less information out of there, out of the various departments, because they have their work to do and they're understaffed and so on. But if there could be if you will, a volunteer that really pushes for that and in a very positive way urges people to get the information and makes it easy for them to provide it, I think we could achieve what I think we'd all agree is a real valuable thing for the town. The biggest, it sounds like pushback, I guess it is, but it's justified because we have, again, too few people to do too much work. So if we can figure out a way to make that input process easier for the website, I think we'll be well served.
I think this type of strategy where it's like ensure the website is updated and ensure residents know about and sign up for code red alerts, etc. It's sort of it's sort of like an easy strategy to have up here, because if it's already working, it's working, and if it's not working, then you have sort of like a, you have basically, by putting it up here, made a commitment to sort of just like ensure that it keeps working, but it's also not something you have to put a lot of energy towards if it's already going well, if you feel like it's already going well. So, I mean, one thing that is usually the case is that the town could have already established all of these informational systems, but it's just that residents don't know about it, for many different reasons. It could be that they haven't bothered to try and find it out. It could be that they are computer illiterate, or internet illiterate, or they don't have social media, or they're just not that, I guess that is related to the first, where they're just, they're just not that connected to the town's goings on and they don't care to be. But then in that case, there's only so much that you can do anyway. So I'm going to read this, how it's phrased now. And if you can tell me.
I just want to remind everyone that part of including these things, even if they're not issues right this moment, that anything that you might want to apply for in conjunction with an action grant needs to be embedded in the plan. So it's nice to have these things in, even if they're rolling at the moment, so that if in the future you want to build them out in conjunction with a grant, they're in the plan.
There's monthly newsletters that come in with the electric bill, see what's up in the hill towns with CMELD. Maybe there could be some additional communications in that's distributed to the residents every month when they receive their electric bill. Boom, there it is.
So what, Laura, what would you like to see? So just so I can write it in the strategy, what would you like to see included in there specifically that's not currently included?
Maybe some additional resources of outreach that would go with the newsletter to the town's residents every month. Maybe something along those lines.
I think Lori would be a really good coordinator for that.
You stop that. You stop that.
Laura, are you signing up?
I must confess that same thought has occurred to me.
I will outreach to anybody that wants me to outreach for anything. That's cool. I'm no problem with doing that.
So, Corinne, oh, I think I'm frozen again.
I can hear you. Okay, so I'm going to read this. I'm going to read this back. Ensure website is updated in that all departments and committees have the site updated with relevant news and information. Ensure residents know about and sign up for Code Red alerts. Have booth at Chester on track to ensure information about Code Red, elected officials, and events and initiatives is dispersed. Also use this event to recruit volunteers to help to distribute information, etc. Consider using the What's Up in the Hill Towns newsletter that is included in energy bills to share information, and work with the elementary school to teach fifth graders how to access information about their town.
If you can put in there somewhere about the website, continue utilization and optimize its potential, something like that. Striving to optimize its potential, because there's more potential there than has been realized, without no criticism intended of anybody, but we have to, focus on how do we make sure that people If it requires community education for people that can't connect to the website, that's part of it. That's what we've been talking about. We need, frankly, volunteer leadership in that area.
Okay, so I added that to the volunteer section for updating the website, and then also keep the website updated with relevant news and information and strive to optimize its potential.
Yeah, and obviously, ultimate control of that has to be with the town administrator and whoever she, works with on that, to make sure that there's some, for want of a better way to say it, quality control.
Yeah, accountability.
Accountability, yeah.
Okay, so because it's almost 11:40 now, let's move into prioritization. So again, you will remember this from previous meetings, but we are going to prioritize based off of the feature itself, not all of the different strategies. So the first one is communications and alerts, communications alerts in technology, short, long, or ongoing.
Ongoing.
Yeah, ongoing.
Ongoing.
Okay. High, medium, or low potential.
Hi.
Aye.
Medium.
Medium, because it's
Aye.
Okay, I'm doing H/M. So we heard a couple mediums. Okay, climate vulnerable residents with barriers to building resilience, specifically income challenged youth and seniors. Short, long, or ongoing. That was, the one strategy for that was one that was previously added, was establish a buddy system for houses that are vulnerable to flooding, to have a buddy on the hill, not vulnerable to flooding, who might be able to check in and see if help is needed. Short, long, or ongoing?
Ongoing.
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 Okay, high, medium, or low?
aye.
Low.
Hi. Medium.
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 All right, I heard at least one for every option there. So what I tend to do in this case is I just tend to go, when it's split like this, I tend to go with the highest that I hear, which in this case would be high. And then if you are ever writing a grant for something like this, you can indicate that it's a high priority, but it also doesn't commit you to writing a grant for this. Is everybody okay with that if I make this high?
Yeah.
I'm okay.
Okay. Okay, so the next one is plans and regulations, including designing for multimodal and accessible connectivity. So this was the feature that had strategies around biking, sidewalks, urban design for accessibility, for like places to sit, etc.
Ongoing.
Okay,
Yeah, ongoing.
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 and high, medium, or low?
Medium.
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 Great. Okay, the next one is the emergency services and volunteers. So that this was one previously identified strategy that was host a community day with evacuation route demonstrations, gatherings and food, and educational handouts on what to do during different types of emergencies.
Ongoing.
Ongoing.
Yeah, ongoing.
Okay.
Ongoing.
Ongoing. Yeah.
High, medium, or low?
Hi.
Aye.
Medium.
Medium.
Okay, I'll do another H/M for that one. Historical buildings. The previously identified strategy for this was create public outreach material about understanding your past and planning for the future. How did people live before electricity and water in the taps? Should some of this be taught or reclaimed?
Not this one, this one. That's fine.
Ongoing.
Yeah, I'm going.
Ongoing.
Okay. And high, medium, or low?
High.
Medium.
Low.
No,
Okay.
High, medium.
This is another one. We have multiple ones. So I'll do high here, and it can be up to you whether you apply for that or not. Regional services, and for this we have that transit strategy, which was down here. It was advocate for increased public transit to assist aging population and connectivity generally to Chester, which was reach out to BRTA to arrange for cross-county access and via public transit, and by continuing to advocate for their renewal of the rail and the Chester rail stop. So that was the regional services.
Ongoing.
Going.
I'm
Okay.
going.
Ongoing.
And high, medium, or low?
High.
Aye.
Aye.
Land value and tax rates. That was continue working with Senator Hines on the pilot program.
I'm going.
Ongoing.
Ongoing.
And high, medium, or low?
High.
Aye.
Aye.
Local economy and pride and sense of place. The only ones we have for this are the transit strategy, so I'm just going to skip past them. Littleton Reservoir and Recreation Area and Open Space and Recreation Plan don't have anything, neither does the elementary school. So we'll skip all of those. And then significant decline in enrollment at high school. That was the strategy where we spoke about working with the high school administration to create more robust programming to retain and attract more students.
Ongoing high.
There was one other thing that we, I'm sorry, alternative educational experiences also includes collaboration with other school districts. Exploring potential of collaboration with other budding school districts, adjoining school districts. We shouldn't leave any possibility out in terms of looking at alternatives.
All right, so explore potential for collaboration with nearby school. Nearby school. Okay. So I heard an ongoing for this, I think.
Ongoing.
ongoing.
Okay, and then priority, high, medium, low.
High.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Oops. All right, our next one here is potential for climate migration. So that included both the transit strategy and the whole two-pronged action around the climate migration analysis, and then using the results of the analysis to do a regulatory review.
Ongoing.
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 Okay.
Ongoing.
High, medium, low. High.
High priority.
Aye.
Aye.
Leanna, I keep thinking of your daughter when, or what I'm assuming is your daughter when everyone says hi. I'm like, should I be waving?
I know. I managed to get her out of the house for the morning, so.
All right, so then we have opportunity for greater cultural inclusion via outreach, programming, et cetera. That was holding intergenerational and community-based experiential learning and expeditionary style programming, place-based natural environment and learning. Short, long, or ongoing?
Ongoing.
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 High, medium, low?
High.
High, yeah. High, medium, yeah.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, then we have this is the transit strategy just written out. So it's the feature was the FERTA and lack of other public transit. So I think for the previous one, we said it was ongoing and high. Is that right?
Yeah, is the rail stop supposed to be in there too?
Yes, and it is. So we have the reach out to Berta to arrange for cross-country access via public transit, and by continuing to advocate for east-west rail restoration with an emphasis on the Chester stop.
Yep.
Okay.
Ongoing, high priority.
Great. All right, last two. This one is outdoor and recreation-based quality of life, and that was continue to assess, design, and implement pedestrian and cycling amenities, especially in town center, and especially as connected to trailheads, train station, and businesses.
Ongoing.
Ongoing.
Ongoing,
And high, medium, or low?
high priority.
High, definitely.
Aye.
Aye.
I want to ride the bikes.
Okay, and then the last one here, we have the Old Chester Elementary School, and that was renovate and preserve old school to be a community building with shared use agreements for education, meetings, gatherings, and town offices, etc.
Can I,
Ongoing.
can I say something here, Corinne, that I don't know if they want to include in that development, but I see that elementary school as also a possible place where something like a youth hostel that then developed a woofing program where students would come and then work in area farms. I don't know if that's something that the town is interested in, but it seems like that building particularly would lend itself to that.
Interesting. And if there wasn't room, we'd find room for that idea somewhere, whether it's there or someplace else, in my view. That's a great idea.
It kind of marries with the idea of attracting international students to the
Yes.
to the high school, and then if you could also extend that to have them stay for the summer and visit the area, staying in a hostel, and then maybe the woofing programs where they exchange their labor for farms that need folks in exchange for housing and room and board.
They did actually pass legislation for that recently too, didn't they?
I think that's a great idea, and Chris Martinson should weigh in on that one with what he's proposing there, because with that whole international perspective, and he has international outreach already existing, that where they could come and work there and other places, and I would add, make it year round.
I like it.
I actually added that to the feature that was opportunity for greater cultural inclusion via outreach, programming, recreational activities, etc., because it seems to span across several of these. So let me know if you disagree with that. I said, and what I wrote is also consider a public hostel and developing, so that way I didn't tie it specifically to the school. I can if you want, or we can just leave it open. Also consider a public hostel and developing programming such as WOOF, which attracts international and national students to come participate in Chester agriculture and economy.
Maybe you'd want, maybe I'm just throwing it out, maybe you'd want to make it youth and elder hostels. So that we really, because that's pretty well known internationally as something that is very attractive to particularly young people and older people.
Okay, I said intergenerational hostel.
Yep, there you go. That's, yeah.
It becomes another talking point for needing a train stop.
Right.
Exactly. Great. Yep.
Okay, so for the old elementary school, we had gotten to ongoing with the timeline, and then priority, high, medium, or low.
Hi.
Aye.
Okay, and that rounds us out here. So I'm just going to talk about next steps for a minute. I'm going to stop my share. So next steps are that we will be, as I said before, hopefully by Tuesday at the latest, uploading these videos to YouTube so that I can share the links with you all, and then you can share them with anyone who you know who was not able to participate with us today. We're going to continue working with Meredith and Kathy on developing, and anybody else who's part of the working group here, on developing the plans for the public engagement component of the planning grant. And simultaneously, sort of behind the scenes, PVPC will continue the writing of the draft summary of findings report. That will be done, it's April 10th. That will be done sometime within the next couple of weeks. And then we will share that with the working group for comment and review. It will basically be summarizing what was discussed at these workshops, as well as pulling together a bunch of background information that comes from different sources together all in one location. And it sets the tone for any future MVP action grant that you apply for, where EEA is able to refer back to your summary of findings reports to see how ideas are interconnected, how you prioritize different ideas in the past, etc. They are supposed to be living documents. So the community, by achieving planning grant status, is sort of committing to reviewing the summary of findings reports regularly. I don't remember what the set time period is for that, but don't feel like if something comes up next year that didn't make it into the conversation today, don't feel like that means you'll never be able to apply for MVP funding for it. Certainly they're addended onto and updated from time to time. I believe all of the or not all of the strategies, but a good portion of the strategies that we did today and over the other two workshops were rated high priority. So that's kind of good, because there's really, you want to be truthful in your prioritization, but it also, you know, the higher priority you rank something, the more committed you're showing MVP when you write your action grant that this is something that the town means to implement. And so it just, you know, they look for high priority strategies when they're receiving action grant applications.
Can I ask a question? Just because when I spoke with Peggy, hi Peggy, she had a very dynamic and sort of powerful support of the senior community in terms of preparing and supplying food. And I just want to make sure that things like that that are well established aren't only dependent on that individual, that there's someone that's, you know, or some mention that you're going to capture this amazing thing that is already happening and make sure that it has a structure and a foundation to continue in the future. Because I think, at least in our conversation, Peggy, it just sounded like you really had an incredible thing that you offered through the Chester Town Hall. And I want to make sure that that's captured here somewhere in the planning so that it's identified as a real strength and dealing with a vulnerability, and make sure that you feel supported and that you have had that expressed in this planning process.
Okay.
So what I would say here is that type of, to capture existing actions that are ongoing, that should be in the summary of findings report where they talk about, you talk about what's already happening with the town, what's working and what's not working. So certainly somebody should get me some information on what this is not something I know about. It's not written about in any of the background research I've done. And Meredith, I don't know if you have already written about it and I haven't seen those things yet, but
a little bit, but I would love to have, maybe I'll try and come and meet with you, Peggy, so we can capture what you're doing and make sure that you feel like there's a real foundation so that it will continue, and that you have enough support to have that an ongoing strength in the town of Chester.
Of course, a lot of things have changed with the pandemic, but we do have a good group of volunteers that help with a lot of these things, but most of the stuff has been put on hold except for food programs, the brown bag, the dining center twice a week. I've just recently been asked to add a third day, which we already do. So yes,
So I'll work with you all to make sure that that's captured in the summary of findings report. It sounds like there should also be a strategy around that we didn't talk about today. And it is noon, so we can't extend the meeting, but I don't want to lose the opportunity for that. So during the sort of public engagement period, we'll make sure that that comes up. So maybe Meredith, in your conversations with Peggy, you guys can figure out what the best strategy might be to make sure that Peggy, the activities that you have ongoing have support, or continue into the future, or are institutionalized, whatever, whenever it might be. And then we can add that in as sort of like something that came after the workshops, but from the community, which happens that's the purpose of that time period. So that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up, Meredith. So that's the time frame that we're on now. I believe that the public engagement event will be in May. And then, as I said before, June 30th is the end of the fiscal year. So sometime late June, Chester should get its MVP planning grant certification status. That's sort of the broad timeline there. So you'll next hear back from me, hopefully Monday or Tuesday, as I said, with the link. Then you can start sharing that to the YouTube videos. The Google Drive folder will remain up. Please keep adding to the map if you have anything to add. And also, if you end up coming up with strategies or features or things like that we didn't talk about today, follow that same process. Get in touch with me and let me know, and or wait till our big sort of community event, in which case we'll get those up there. Patty or Meredith, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I'm good.
Nothing from me, other than we might want to tag on the listening session for the Dirt Road study that was sent around. I know it's really meant for the community members that are having that, but it might be interesting for some of the members in Chester to just listen in so that they can also hear the presentation. And
Meredith, I know Emily sent you, she CC'd me on an email that she sent you with that flyer. Did you share it to everybody or not?
I haven't yet. I was going to share it when I got the recordings from you, just to say, here's an opportunity to listen to something, but they're coming up. So I'll go ahead and send that out.
Okay. Yeah. I don't remember what the dates are for that off the top of my head. But it would be great if you could forward those.
Okay.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out here for 3 hours on our morning. Now it's afternoon, and you'll be able to go have your lunches outside and hopefully spend the rest of the day enjoying Chester or Beckett or wherever you live. So,
hey, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. And you'll be hearing from
Really
soon.
a wonderful meeting, Corey.
Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Richard. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Everybody have a good weekend.
You too.
You too.
Bye.